mixing it up on the turn is much more important. You feel like, you gotta feel he definitely has something. He's still in the pot. So mixing it up on the turn is much more important. I feel it's very important to be very aggressive on the flop, but definitely change gears on the turn. The river. It's very difficult. Fifth Street, all the cards are out. Now basically all you can do is base your decisions on what you already know about your opponent, know what your own holding are. That's pretty easy to just look at your cards. But basically the bets on the flop, pre-flop, on the turn is going to determine what action you're going to take. The river is also where you can make the big bluff, but be careful. You don't want to be wrong when you push in a lot of chips in the pot. Big bluff can be very effective, but it also can knock you out of the tournament, so be very careful. One key concept on the river that a lot of people use in their play, which I'd like to tell you, don't do that, is actually the fact is sometimes people think that you should bet weak hands and bet really strong hands, but don't bet mediocre hands, because when your opponent calls you, he calls you with a hand that has you beat. Well, if you're betting with weak hands, what we call a bluff, and he sometimes calls you with weak hands, well then sometimes it's important to bet the mediocre hands because he might think you're bluffing. Basically, you don't want to have one certain pattern. You don't want your opponents to know that you always bet your strong hands, always bet your weak hands, but you never bet your mediocre hands. That's going to make his decision making very easy. Again, a street where you mix it up. Once in a while you make the big bluff. Be careful though, don't do it too often. Once in a while it's going to work out, and if you pick the right timing, it could really work out for you. Again, mix it up. Sometimes you beat your mediocre hands and you will be surprised what people will call you with. People don't like to get bluffed. People are curious, and what it will also do for you is when you bet a lot of mediocre hands, they throw away their hand. You kind of say to yourself, maybe I shouldn't have bet because he was only going to call me with a hand that had me beat. But it also is kind of stuck in his mind. When you bet one time, he folds. You bet another time, he folds. You bet the third time, he folds. When you bet the fourth time, he can't take it anymore. He's getting curious. You can't have it all the time. And the fourth time might actually be the time where you had the really good hand. So what it also creates an image of, they kind of feel you're bluffing all the time, and you're betting with mediocre good hands that you think are the best hand. It's very important in poker to bet when you think you have the best hand. And it does have some value, even though your opponent folds. It does have some value because it's going to stick in his mind. He's going to be curious. He's going to be a little bit annoyed. Did he bluff me that time? I don't know for sure. Did he bluff me that time? Did he bluff me the next time? And at some point, they're going to pay you off. So sometimes the big bluff will work, but I tend to bet my really good hands and my mediocre hands. I don't bluff a lot on the river. Sometimes maybe not enough, but mix it up, and I'll sure you come out ahead. Very strong to check raise players, but one thing it will do, it will a lot of times commit a lot of your money into the pot. So in spots where you check raise people, you better be certain that you're doing the right thing. One thing I will probably do a lot less than other people is to check raise. I like to be the aggressor. I like to be the initial bettor. A lot of times when you plan a check raise, you might be in for a surprise. You were trying to check raise, but the guy didn't bet. You have to be very certain when you try to check raise. A lot of times you have to be certain that you have the best hand, because else you're going to commit a lot of your chips into the pot. A lot of times you have to be certain that the guy is betting, and he's betting a weaker hand that you're trying to check raise with. So there's a lot of consideration that has to be made, and you really have to feel that you're making the right decision when you're trying to check raise people. Sometimes very important thing is check raise seems very strong to your opponent. They know that you checked already. They're betting, they're representing a strong hand, and now you come back with a check raise. So what that means, actually, a check raise bluff is a viable option, and you've got to check raise sometimes just to keep your opponents off guard. Again, this is a thing that I tend to emphasize a lot, is the importance of actually betting out. A lot of times you could say, well, you flop top pair, and a lot of people tend to like to check raise, which is generally the wrong idea, because it's a lot of times going to cost you too much money. If you checked around and I bet, I could be betting with anything. To find out something, you would have to check raise and put a larger amount of money in the pot. Instead, you let out, and now I raise there, and you could say, okay, I'm probably beat, or maybe it's a big draw, I'm just going to fold this hand, and it only costs you 25. So a lot of times, leading out will get you a lot of information, but get you information cheaper. So, I mean, a lot of times by betting out, you get your information cheaper, and actually when you hold the big hand, you lead out and you get raised, now you can check raise, and now really maybe get a lot of money in the pot. So in general, leading out is the correct play in a lot of situations, and
fully agree with that.
People tend to want to check raise because it looked good, it sounds good, but a lot of times it's not the most effective way.
Between those two, I can't. I mean, even if I had ace.
Yeah, you can, depending on the situation, but in general, the lead out is so much stronger, because sometimes you're going to lead out with your 7-8, which is a draw. You're going to lead out with different kinds of hands, with strong hands, with medium hands, with total bluff hands, but it's going to be a cheap bluff. So, I mean, varying your style is, of course, very important, but leading out will a lot of times take more advantage of the situation than sitting around checking. One thing that's very important to notice when you're in middle position, late position, when you decide to play your weaker hands, is somebody already in the pot already. If somebody's in, it definitely changes your starting hands a lot. If you're on the button, nobody is in, you have an easy raise with almost any hand, but is there a couple of people in the pot already? Is there just one other guy in the pot already? It just limits your starting hands a lot. Overcalling, there's a big gap. A lot of people call it the gap theory. There's a big difference on being the first one in the pot or being the second, third, or fourth guy in the pot. It changes the starting hands a lot. If you're first in the pot, it gives you some power to raise, to pick up the blinds right here and now. But if somebody is already in, it changes it a lot. To pick up the blinds, you have to re-raise. Just calling won't win you the pot right there. So it takes a lot stronger hand to come into the pot when somebody's already in. There's a big difference. If one guy raises before the flop, he's the first guy in the pot, he could have a lot of different